During the mid-13th century and the early years of the 14th century, the Scottish people fought for freedom and independence from the rule of the English monarch, and much of the Scots' story, their triumphs, defeats, and plots of regicide, is seen in William Shakespeare's Macbeth. While writing Macbeth, Shakespeare was influenced not only by medieval Scottish history, regicide and rebellion against the English crown, but also by pervading perspectives of the times, such as the Great Chain of Being.
The tragedy of Macbeth was influenced in part by Scotland's long history of successful military intervention. The Scots played a major part in driving the Norwegians out of the Western Isles, as seen in Macbeth, and also have fought two bloody yet successful wars of independence with England.
Although a small country, the Kingdom of Scotland had participated in many wars. One of Scotland's most famed military feats was driving the Norwegians out of the Western Isles, islands off the coast of Scotland. According to Dr. Michael Brown of BBC, the kings of Scotland had a recognized place amongst the princes of Europe. Alexander III had successfully extended his realm by forcing the kings of Norway to surrender their rights over the Western Isles.
During this time frame, England was a perennial military powerhouse in Europe. They believed that they could conquer any country they invaded, and in 1296 the Brits invaded Scotland. According to Dr. Brown, the spring of 1296 saw the outbreak of savage war between the two kingdoms of Britain. While a Scottish host ravaged northern England, Edward I's English army laid waste to Berwick, Scotland's largest town. These proved to be the opening moves in a long and bloody conflict.
Scotland eventually stops the English advances and signs the Treaty of Edinburgh, which finalized their independence. All in all, Scottish success in battle directly influences Shakespeare and the play of Macbeth. Macbeth's success in battle against the Norwegians is his first step in his rise to power.
William Shakespeare may have also been influenced by previous cases of Scottish regicide. Just over 100 years before he wrote Macbeth, Walter Stewart, the Earl of Atholl, planned and carried out an assassination of the Scottish king.
Just as Macbeth acquired multiple titles of nobility, according to Oxford Reference, Walter Stewart was also the Earl of Caithness, Lord of Methven, and Earl of Strathearn.
Stewart, however, became worrisome that the king would take away his titles. According to Oxford Reference, fears that James I was seeking to undermine his position, Stewart and his grandson Robert organized a successful assassination plot. The king was murdered in Perth, Blackfriars on February 20th, 1437, but Stewart was beheaded for regicide on March 26, 1437.
Just like the character of Macbeth in the play, Stewart was afraid that the king would take away his lordship, so he plotted an assassination of the king. Stewart was then beheaded for his deeds, just as Macduff beheads Macbeth for his deeds.
Another influence on Shakespeare in the play is that in Shakespeare's times, hierarchy and social order, as shown by such things in the Great Chain of Being, played a large role in how society worked.
According to Stanford professor Christopher Gabbard, the Great Chain of Being was a powerful visual metaphor for a divinely inspired universal hierarchy ranking all forms of higher and lower life. The picture shows, in order, God, angels and demons, kings and queens, and then regular men. This hierarchy was widely accepted, and it was considered almost blasphemous to go against it.
Those who did go against it were punished. William Wallace served as a prime example of this. Wallace organized resistance to the English in Scotland in the late 13th century, defeating them at the Battle of Stirling Bridge in September of 1297. He continued a guerrilla campaign for a further 7 years, but was eventually betrayed, taken to London, and executed.
William Wallace was not a nobleman. He was born to a poor farming family in Scotland. He did grow to become one of the most successful Scottish military leaders, but was ultimately punished by those higher up on the chain who he tried to rebel against. Macbeth also goes against the Great Chain of Being and is punished for it. He was a lord, not a king or queen, and by killing Duncan, he went against the hierarchical system and was eventually punished for it. In conclusion, Scottish conflicts at home and abroad, as well as pervading perspectives of the time, influenced Shakespeare and his writing of the tragedy Macbeth.